Hi, Andrew from Sachs, and welcome to video number 7 in our 7-video sequence about leadership for 3 things: well-being, productivity, and development. Now this one will be about coaching for growth, and we'll take you through some evidence-based approaches to optimize coaching so that you can optimize the development of the people who work in your organization. The first thing we want to do is to talk about succession planning. And I mentioned in an earlier video that people sometimes see succession planning kind of like a circuit diagram or a flow chart for an organization. You know, you've got 3 potential people who might take over this job, and then that will eventually lead up to that job. And I mentioned earlier that the risk of that kind of an approach is that those things often don't work out. In other words, the connection rate of the final succession plan tends to be pretty weak when you do it that way. So the alternative is to use a bench strength kind of an approach. So here's how it looks. What you have is the capabilities of the aspirant to the more senior role. This is the more senior role here. You'll notice that there are some common characteristics in the 2 roles. One is that this job, the less senior job, has certain outcomes that needs to be delivered. And in an earlier video in this sequence, I talked about this concept called outcome-based job definition. Now, in order to achieve these outcomes, the employee needs certain skills, they need certain experience and qualifications necessary, and they will also need certain attributes, styles, behaviors, approaches, those kinds of things. And the idea is that when an employee is totally on top of the competencies that are necessary to deliver the outcomes of their current job, well, maybe it's time to consider whether they have the capabilities necessary to move up to the next job, the more senior job. So the more senior job has certain outcomes that need to be achieved, and some of those outcomes may overlap with the less senior job, but in order to achieve those outcomes there will be certain skills, certain experience or qualification, and once more certain attributes that will allow the achievement of those outcomes. In the earlier video I also mentioned about the fact that sometimes we promote our best technician into our worst leader. So it's important that we assess some of these leadership characteristics before we promote somebody. In order to do that, what we can do is we can use some measurement technology, and I'll show you how that works in just a second. But once we've identified whether the person truly has the potential to step up to the more senior role, then what we need to do is develop a thing called a development plan. And the development plan, in effect, is the mechanism by which this person gets developed to step up to the more senior role. So you've got a certain person who you think is ready to be promoted to a more senior role, let's say their first leadership role or a more senior leadership role. One of the things that you can use to do this is 360-degree feedback. This is how you ensure that your best technician doesn't become your worst leader, because you're measuring leadership characteristics. And so using an evidence-based 360-degree feedback approach allows you to launch a survey and to find out how the raters feel about this person. So the self rates, the leader rates, the peers rate, the direct reports rate, and the indirect reports. Indirect reports are typically people from across the organization who are kind of stakeholders. This person is not in their direct reporting line, not their boss, not their subordinate, but an important internal stakeholder. And a very sensible thing to do is also to run psychometric assessment. And the reason for that is that the psychometric assessment helps you to understand why is the person behaving in this way. One of the things that I like to do is when we're undertaking this process for clients, what we'll do is that if we've got the psychs, we'll forecast what the 360-degree feedback might look like. It's amazing how accurately you can do that if you're using an evidence-based psych testing approach. But the combination of 360-degree feedback and psychometric assessment leads to a debrief meeting where the leader, the aspiring more senior person, can learn an enormous amount about themselves and can also participate in a process where they explain their aspirations, both short-term and long-term, and it gives them an opportunity to buy into something which is going to help them in a career development sense. Very powerful stuff. And then you can create out of the combination of the data and the debrief meeting an individualised development plan. And that individualised development plan should be targeted at that specific individual and how to cause them to be successful to step up to the next role, addressing things like their strengths, their development areas, and their aspirations, so that it's very personalised and they understand, here are the things that I need to do, here are the things that the organisation needs to do, here are the things that my immediate leader needs to do. All of that in combination can create a very personalised and targeted development approach that causes people to be able to step up in terms of seniority and maximizes the probability of their success. Now, the important thing about all of this is this preparation means that when they do step up, the probability of running into that awful situation where you all of a sudden hit a roadblock, and what do? I mean, we can't send this person back to their job, and okay, are they up for coaching and all that stuff? Well, it's far better to assess all the risks of that before you promote. And then, of course, you can, if you have enough of these in a particular group, you can assess group results, which can be really powerful, and that leads on to coaching. And the coaching is what causes the person to change. So a typical development plan has the following components. It addresses the aspirations of the person who is stepping up, their goals, it identifies their strengths, it identifies their development areas, and then it comes up with very specific suggestions for development, and it's all based on a self-awareness process and, of course, information for the organisation about what this person's likely to prosper in and what they might struggle with based on their psychometric and 360-degree feedback profile. And then that leads to the question of coaching. What works in coaching? Well, historical coaching formats tended to be having a chat. You know, we'd sit down and we'd talk about what's going well and what's going badly. This is in the category of what in clinical areas would be called talking cures. Talking cures are notoriously ineffective. Good coaching should be very specifically goal-based and outcome-focused, and it should have really clear activities. And increasingly these days, coaching formats are based on neuroscience evidence. Here's a neuroscience-based approach. It's called the DROP technique. The DROP technique stands for four things: D for destination setting, R for reality checking, O for option creation, P for planning, doing, and reflection. In an earlier video, I talked about feedback versus feed forward, and I said that if you focus on the future, it tends to turn on the prefrontal cortex. It tends to make you more aspirational, it tends to make you more creative, it tends to make you more optimistic. The destination setting exercise is very specifically identifying an outcome, an end point that we are seeking to head towards. So, if my staff don't like me for some reason, we can say, all right, well, here's the things that they don't like about me. But an alternative way, and a far more productive way, is to set a destination. And you can do this by getting a person to sit in front of a piece of paper and write down up to 5 words or phrases that they want their staff to say about them in 6 months' time. That's a development approach which is based on a destination. And the more specific the destination is, they will say that I'm helpful. They will say that I'm productive. They will say that I care about their development. They will say that I'm really clear about what needs to be achieved in this job. Those kinds of things could be things that come out of a destination setting exercise. So destination setting can be very important. And one of the things that we know is that where a destination has been set in a facilitative fashion between a leader and a staff member, if that person owns that destination, they can actually start to move towards it even before further formal coaching takes place. The second stage is reality checking. And the main reality checking exercise is just to ask, how close are you to this destination? So if we've agreed that your staff are going to say that you're helpful and supportive and you're really clear about performance standards, let's be honest, where would they rate you right now? And it's a good idea to do this reality checking in terms of numbers. 10 means I'm there, nothing needs to change. 1 means I'm as far from perfect as possible. 5 means it's kind of neither good nor bad. And if the person rates themselves, what you can do is you can use that as a tool for them to re-rate from time to time. Teaching people to self-rate is one of the most powerful learning capabilities we can have. It's a meta-learning technique. It's learning how to learn. So there's strong research evidence that when somebody is absolutely brand new to something, feedback from a coach can be powerful. Once they start to develop any capability whatsoever, what's really powerful is where the coach teaches them how to self-rate. The self-ratings make them independent in terms of developing. The third component is option creation. Option creation is a really important skill for self-development. I have decided that I want to be a better leader. I have come up with 5 words or phrases that describe that. I think I'm a 4, and I really want to be at least a 7 in 6 months' time. Let's then think about how we're going to achieve that. And the job of the coach in that situation is to sponsor creativity so that when you do this with people, you'll see that very often, they don't have that many ideas. You know, they think, oh, I could do this. The job of the coach is to coach the person to be more creative, more broad-minded about the range of possibilities. And you do that kind of like a brainstorming exercise. Again, it's really good if they write this stuff down as they do it. But they make a note of the ideas that they have about how they're going to improve their leadership development skills. And then the final bit, planning, doing, and reflecting, is where we decide mutually together how we're going to help you to achieve those things. And in effect, that gets consolidated into the development plan that I mentioned earlier. Now, if you've been through a formal development plan process, then it may well be that some of this is going to be encapsulated in the development plan that was built from 360-degree feedback and psych testing. But there may be other things that are not in that plan, things that are to do with experience. Okay, well, you'll deputise for this leader to build these skills, or maybe you'll undertake certain projects to build certain skills. So succession planning, learning and development, there are contemporary techniques which look a little different from what has been the case in the past. And the good news is they tend to be much more successful. So thanks for watching this sequence of videos. I hope that's been of help. If you're interested in learning more about some of the tools that we've mentioned in this process, or you want to learn more about some of these techniques, don't hesitate to be in touch with SACS either by clicking on links near this video or by checking us out on the web.